ETE Mhetep Seni Senet Ankwastajed Ank Uja Seneb Dua Hinu for listening as you have tuned into another episode of Heck in the Chair, Praise the Divine. As you know, we're going over the Allan Gardiner series. I'm going to start making other videos as well, but I'm busy. This is something I know I can do because all I got to do is read the book and break down things I know. And give you guys some time so you guys can actually review the videos, learn, get your pens and papers ready, get your pens and pencils out, because you should know this information without question if you study with us, so you already know what it is. I'm going to share the screen. There she is. Last time we left, we were on part C, a brief history of Egyptian philology. These will be on the internet for further use, of course, because they need to be. This way, if somebody says something, somebody claims something, somebody does this, that, the other, you can always just come right back here and say, no, I remember. Sir Allan did the video. It's video 12. Remember, it talks about adjectives and whatever it is. Remember, necessary verbs and all that stuff. It's going to be here. So it won't be any, nonsense happening to you if you're over here, because you're going to know exactly what is and what's not, as I've always told you that. But hey, let's go. A brief history of Egyptian philology. This is video 4. The tradition and its interpreters. As Christianity spread throughout Egypt, the knowledge of the old native scripts and lore long sensed the jealousy. We'll get to the rest in a minute. Let's read these footnotes, make sure it's nothing super important. Hieratic Paleography, 3 volumes by Leipzig, 1909 through 12. You might want to look for that book. Hieratic Leipzig, 3 volumes, same thing. On the transcription of hieratic, see additional 63A. I believe it's Wilson Spielberg. I could be wrong. It might be William. Demotic Grammatic, that's the Demotic Grammar, Heidelberg, 1925, and W. Erickson, Demotic Lesetzung, or Lesetzung, that's in German. Egyptian Antiquity Classique, that's from Egyptian Antiquity. This is French. Introduction de l'étude des hiéroglyphes. So this is an introduction to the hieroglyphs, basically here, Paris, 1922. Any of these books you might want to look up, especially if you speak French or German, or if you know how to use Google Translate really well. Let's move on. So here we've got some scripts, right? Script here. Script here. We covered this last time, in fact. Script here. Script here. Got hieratic. 20th dynasty compared to the 12th dynasty. Underneath it, you see the hieroglyphic. You see these clear ones? These clear ones here? This is the hieroglyphic. Here's our hieratic. Here. In the 20th dynasty, you see it cleans up a bit compared to how it looked in the 12th dynasty. So you see the cleaning up and the changing. Last time we did this, I pulled something out. I think I went here, the meru right here, and then I showed it right here. Mer with the verb meru. And then you would go on to read this. And this, and this, and this, and this, and this. And then when you write it in the hieroglyphic, it makes it easier to understand if somebody writes like a doctor in hieratic. But this is pretty clear hieratic up here. Even though it's an older form of it, here's a newer form of the hieratic. Looks pretty clean too. Looks pretty clean too. Here we go. This is demotic here. Demotic. And the script is still the same. We're still talking about the same script, right? Actually, the script below changes. Pardon me. This is 3rd century BC. So this change. Does it change below? Okay, I see this. Yeah, this script changes a little bit here. Hold up, my girlfriend is calling. Yes, my love. I'm doing the show real quick, so I'm gonna keep you here. Hold on, you got anything I need to know real quick? No. Okay, here I go.
Yeah, but you want to hear it.
Hold on one sec, Greg. You lie. You here? So, specimens of hieratic and demotic with hieroglyphic transcriptions in a modern Egyptological hand. So you're looking at those scripts, so you can start to understand the differences and some of the nuances, just from looking at it. But actually learning it will teach you those things, so you really understand the differences and the nuances in writing. But let's go. Let's go back up to our old sentence and continue with that one. Egypt, the tradition and its interpreters. As Christianity spread throughout Egypt, the knowledge of the old native scripts and lore, long since the jealousy, somebody's jealous, guarded secret of a dwindling priestly caste fell into oblivion. So the priestly caste fell into oblivion as Christianity started to sweep the country. In the 2nd century, candidates for the priesthood had still to show a knowledge of Demotic and Hieratic. In the 3rd century, Demotic is no longer used for documents, though there are Demotic inscriptions at Philae dating as late as AD 452, some 60 years after the final disappearance of the hieroglyphs. You might want to mark that date down. After this, there remains only the tradition of the classical writers and the early fathers, whose confused and mutually contradictory statements, if they point anywhere, point in a direction diametrically opposed to the truth. Wow. Scattered remarks in Herodotus, Diodorus, and Tacitus, to mention only the better known authors, do indeed imply that plain narratives of historical events form part, at least, of the substance of the hieroglyphic inscriptions. And Josephus expressly states that the celebrated work of the historian Manetho was compiled from such sources. An obscure passage in the Stramatides of Clement of Alexandria, about AD 200, may also be interpreted as affirming that the hieroglyphs comprise phonetic signs. But the same testimony just mentioned was altogether outweighed by the assertion of those whose beliefs and predelications were of a mystical kind. So they're doing something here. They're telling you that priests were conflicted concerning the tradition of the hieroglyphs. They're also saying that Clement of Alexandria understood them to have phonetic value, meaning you can pronounce as letters. But the same testimony just mentioned was altogether outweighed by who? Some mystical, magical dude who came around and said, no, they're mystical figures. So this was happening way back then, just like it's happening right now. And if you know Clement of Alexandria, you know he knew. His parents were pagan. He knew, right? And he's one of the teachers at the school that Mark opened, which was in Alexandria, Egypt, for those Bible thumpers, right? The first Bible school, or Christian school, if you will, right? So When we talk about this in the treatise on Isis and Osiris, Plutarch compares the content of the hieroglyphic writings to the maxims of the Pythagoreans. The climax was, however, reached by Apollo, a native of Upper Egypt who flourished in the second half of the 5th century. His treatise Hieroglyphica, written probably in Coptic but surviving only in a Greek translation, combines correct notions of the meanings of many hieroglyphic signs with the most grotesque allegorical reasons for those meanings. So, Apollo gets it right. He messes up a few things, but he can show you phonetic value, which right now, and I don't know how, but right now seems to be in flux with some of the people who are, watching some of our discussions. You got people talking, they've never been deciphered. They've never been, we don't understand what's going on. And then you got people like me and some of my partners, we'll get on the stream and we'll just start reading them. Then we'll tell you, then we'll relate it to whatever we're talking about and you'll see it makes sense. Then we can pull up something from ancient history and it'll make sense for you then when we read it out, because it's been deciphered obviously, and they do have phonetic value. So anyone telling you they don't have phonetic value and it's mystical, magical, and they no, that's silliness. Let's keep going. Thus the goose symbolizes sun, Sa, if you will, for those who don't know, because it doesn't say it here, but you know I know. Because of that bird's intense love of its offspring, the hare serves to write for the word for open, because the hare's eyes always remain open, and so forth. Fantastic explanations of this type appealed all too readily to the medieval mind, and until the beginning of the 19th century, the opinion persisted almost as an article of faith that the Egyptian hieroglyphs gave symbolic expression to recondite philosophical and religious doctrines. That erroneous opinion derived a new impetus from the learned speculations of the very man to whom the Western world owes the revival of its interest in accomplished Orientalists, to whom was entrusted the translation of a Coptic Arabic vocabulary brought home from Egypt to Pietro della Valle. Kircher's Prodromus Coptus Sive Egypticus, published in 1636, marks the beginning of a long sequence of books upon Coptic, a subject upon which no inconsiderable volume of information was available. When at last scholars obtained the key to the decipherment of the hieroglyphs. For this, however, the time was not yet ripe, and the theories of Kircher as to the content of the hieroglyphic inscriptions exceed all bounds in their. You can go see Thematic Graffiti, where the Jones see the admirable account given by Cordemer, Recherche sur la langue et la littérature de l'Égypte. La Egypt, okay, Paris. So that's a French and another book up here. Anyway, let's go here. Imaginative folly. Cartouche of the pharaoh Apries encountered on a Roman obelisk signifies to Kircher that the benefits of the divine Osiris are to be procured by means of sacred ceremonies and of the chain of the genie, in order that the benefits of the now may be obtained. So, let me look in the chat real quick. Let me see. No, I didn't even share the stream. Let's just see who's. Let me see who's in here with us real quick. Let me go over here. Let me see if the chat. I don't think anyone is in here because I didn't even share this. Yeah, so I didn't think so. Nobody yet, or at all for this one. I'll probably be sharing it later, like I always do. I like it that way sometimes. Let's proceed. So the decipherment of the hieroglyphs against such fruitless speculations, the occasional acute observations of exceptional men like the Guinness, obviously his name, Warburton, and Karsten Niebuhr could avail but little in the absence of some definite clue to the decipherment of the ancient scripts. Such a clue was at last provided when some French soldiers working on the foundations of a fortress at Rosetta came across a trilingual inscription in Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphic. This inscription, ever since famous under the name of the Rosetta Stone, proved from its Greek portion to be a decree in honor of the young king Ptolemy Epiphanes, which the priests of Egypt caused to be erected in all the temple of the land. Unhappily, only a relatively small portion of the hieroglyphic text is preserved, and doubtless it was for this reason, though partly also on account of the symbolic nature then attributed to the hieroglyphs, that scholars first directed their attention towards the Demotic section. The stone itself had passed into the hands of the English, but a copy remained with the celebrated French Orientalist Sylvestre de Sacy. After an abortive attempt of his own, de Sacy handed the copy uh, on to the Swedish diplomatist Ackerblad, a man of considerable attainments at that time, devoting himself to Oriental researches in Paris. Within the short space of 2 months, Ackerblad succeeded, by a comparison of the Greek and the Demotic text, in identifying in the later all the proper names occurring in the former, besides recognizing alphabetically, written in their correct Coptic forms, the words for temples and for Greeks, together with the pronominal suffix for him and his. In the Lettre Almir de Sacy, published in 1802, a first and most important step is taken towards the goal reached by Champollion just 20 years after. So Ackerblad is your decipherer. It's not actually Champollion. That Ackerblad failed to make any further progress along the road where he had proved so admirable a pioneer was due to a preposition from which he was unable to free himself. The words deciphered by him had been alphabetically written, and he therefore believed that the Demotic writing was exclusively alphabetic. The next great advance was due to an Englishman, no less a personage than the celebrated Thomas Young, the author of the undulatory theory of light. A man of deep learning and wide interest, Young was ever ready to try a new puzzle. So when in 1814 a copy of the Rosetta Stone fell into his hands, he attacked the problem with zest, while approving of Ackerblad's results so far as they went. He quickly realized that Demotic teemed with signs that could not possibly be explained as, we'll see in a minute. So remember the name Ackerblad, right? Adolf Ehrman, he writes about him in his book, in an excellent article, F.L. Griffith, in the Times Literary Supplement, 2nd of February 22. So you might want to try to look for this Adolf Ehrman book. And there's also a linguist who does an excellent job with his grammar book. That's where I initially started my search. Let's go further though. Alphabetic. Further, remember we're talking about Thomas now, not Ackerblad. Further, he grasped the fact that the Demotic and hieroglyphic systems of writing were intimately related, noticing that the Greek section was full of words which repeated themselves. He used these as a basis for dividing up all three sections into their component words, and it was not long before his Greek Demotic vocabulary amounted to 86 groups, most of them correct, though his attempts to indicate the sounds of which they were composed and to adduce Coptic equivalents were as a rule mistaken. In 1816, he announced further discoveries obtained from material other than the Rosetta Stone. He had now identified long passages on papyri belonging to the Book of the Dead, written in hieroglyphic and in hieratic, and had so established the equivalence of the pictorial and cursive forms of the summons. He was certain that both Demotic and hieroglyphic consisted largely of phonetic elements, and having demonstrated the fact, guessed long before the Guinness and Zoega that the cartouches of royal springs seen in the hieroglyphs contained the names of kings and queens. Very ingeniously, but rather luckily identified the cartouche of Bernice in addition to the known one of Ptolemy, and correctly suggested that another cartouche must be that of Manetho Jehudimus of the 18th dynasty. He also pointed out in hieroglyphic the alphabetic characters for F and T and the determinative used in late texts for feminine names, and recognized from variants in the papyri that different characters could have the same powers. In short, the principle of homophony or homophony, all this was mixed up with many false conclusions, but the method pursued was infallibly leading to definite decipherment. Thomas got busy. Now, after Ackerbold and Thomas, this is when you should mention Jean-Francois Champollion. So, let's go. Meanwhile, Jean-Francois Champollion, the young French scholar who was destined to win immortal fame as the decipherer of the hieroglyphs, had as yet but few positive results to record. So he wasn't even as nice as them. He had to look at their work in order to continue his work. Born at Figeac in the department du Lot on the 23rd December 1790, Champollion's interest in Egypt had awakened at a very early age. In his 12th year, he was already conversant with the rudiments of Hebrew and Arabic. And from that time onward, his enthusiasm for things Oriental, warmly encouraged by his elder brother Joseph Champollion Figeac, never flagged. As a student at Grenoble, he applied himself to the study of ancient history together with Coptic and all alphabets and systems of writing which might lead him to his then already clearly perceived goal, the decipherment of the Rosetta Stone, and obviously a linguist. At the age of 18, he became professor at the same university. A few years later, his Republican sympathies brought him into serious trouble. Banished from Grenoble, he returned in 1816 as a schoolmaster to his native town of Figeac. In 1817, he is back at Grenoble, conducting a school and serving as librarian of the local Academy of Sciences. These posts he lost in 1820 and sought refuge with his brother in Paris. Throughout this agitated period of his life, despite keen interest in other directions, Jean-Francois was constantly adding to his store of Egyptian Coptic and Coptic. Professor Griffith's verdict in the article quoted above, page 12, you see the footnote. You can also just write it next to it. You don't always have to put it in a footnote, but yeah. So here we go. Knowledge. Ever and again trying new solutions of the problem, when at last the truth was born in upon him with all the vividness of a revelation, his complete mastery of the available materials enabled him to extend his discoveries with a speed and sureness far beyond the scope of any of his contemporaries. Passing over Champollion's early writings, the first and most ambitious of which was the geographic portion, 2 volumes of a projected encyclopedic work to be called L'Égypte sous les Pharaons, 1814. We now turn our attention to the actual decipherment. Let's get busy. See what they did. Down. Close study had brought him the conviction that the 3 kinds of Egyptian writing were mere modifications of one another. So what does that mean? That means you're seeing the same thing written in different scripts. Let's go. And when in the summer of 1821 he printed his brochure on the hieratic script, he had no difficulty in converting the demotic groups known to him into hieratic and thence into hieroglyphic, with the name of Ptolemy both in hieroglyphic and in demotic. So his knowledge of the hieratic script allowed him to understand what he was reading in demotic. Just as we just showed, they're very familiar to each other up above, right? They look similar. Once he figured out what was being said in the demotic, he could understand it in hieratic, which was the script that he mastered, and it was easy for him to put it in the hieroglyphic after that. Who doesn't understand? Raise your hand. Yeah, exactly. Let's go further. With the name of Ptolemy both in hieroglyphic and in Demotic, he was long since familiar from the Rosetta Stone, and about this time he became acquainted with the Demotic papyrus Kasati, where he found and, as his biographer assures us, at once transcribed into hieroglyphs, a name which he rightly conjectured to be that of Cleopatra. Confirmation of this conjecture was, however, for the moment missing, only for the moment. In 1850, W.J. Banks, exploring the Temple of Philae, had discovered a base block covered with Greek inscriptions in honor of Ptolemy Physicon and the two Cleopatras, near to a fallen obelisk which appeared to have stood upon it. Both the base and the obelisk were transported to England in 1819 to adore Mr. Banks' park at Kingston Lacy. A lithograph of the Greek and hieroglyphic inscriptions was made for Banks in 1821, and in the following January, Latron forwarded to Champollion a copy of Young's, Thomas Young, who we were just talking about, Young's suggestion of Cleopatra, scribbled by Banks against the cartouche. So Young had already figured that out. Champollion is confirming what he's understanding by reading this, by looking at Young's work and obviously looking at the hieratic as well. It seems highly improbable that either on this occasion or previously Young's ingenious but unproven conjectures can have materially helped Champollion, which is a stupid statement. That's a dumb statement they just made. Because how would it not help Champollion if it's confirming what he thinks and nothing has been proven, but Young obviously knows what he's saying. Adelbach already knows what he's saying, and Champollion is using both of their works to make sure his is correct. How would that just be conjecture? That's a stupid statement. You're trying to give Champollion all the credit, and they shouldn't. Let's keep going. Or even have influenced him in any way. And we obviously know that's some nonsense. But his failure to state exactly what he knew of the Englishman's work has done untold harm, however unmerited, to Champollion's reputation. Ackerblad had read the Demotic name of Ptolemy alphabetically, and Champollion, though always inclined to hark back to his incompatible theory of the purely symbolic character of the hieroglyphs. See how stupid that sounds above? Champollion thought it was just symbolic characters when he first got a hold of them. He had to use Young and Ackerblad's work in order to confirm what he knew. So that statement above is nonsense, as you just read, you just heard. Had proved by his identification of the Demotic signs with those contained in the cartouche of Ptolemy that the hieroglyphs also could, at least on occasion, be alphabetic. The values attached by him to the individual hieroglyphs were now confirmed by the cartouche of Cleopatra, which is over here. How do we know? Adra, feminine T. That's what you're seeing right there. That's what we just went through. Really like a Q. Ooh, for lion, which is in it, it's later used, right, in the Ptolemaic era, which this is. Cleopatra. So you see they got the long A for this, for her name. What does this say? Ptolemy. Just so you get it, so you understand what I'm saying, right? The values attached by him to the individual hieroglyphs were now confirmed by the cartouche of Cleopatra. For both cartouches, the signs P for P, U for an O, and U for L for the lion were found standing in exactly the positions where they were to be expected. Let's go back up and read that footnote, because we're almost done with this for the day. The earlier stages of Egyptian, as we have seen, do not indicate the vowels. Just as in the Hebrew writing of German employed by the German Polish Jew, the old semiconsonants, waw and yad, are employed for o and I respectively. So too here the lu, originally wa, for this mode of transliteration, is secondarily employed for o. C-A-Z, also Zeister, die Deutsch, Morgen 77, 145 through 7, just for the footnote. And we finish the sentence right here. Let me see if anybody got on yet. I doubt. You don't even know this is happening right now, see? How could you know? How could you ever know? You would never know. All right, and there you go. Let's go back to it. All right, let's get it. The sign T, see the bread loaf for T, and Ptolemaios differed indeed from the sign D, which is the hand, which represented T here in Cleopatra. But the discrepancy could be easily explained by the principle of homophony, the representation of the same sound by different signs, of which Champollion was well aware. And that's what happens when you use a foreign word in your language. It's like Japanese can't say R very well. It always comes out like a W, doesn't it? Correct. Sound like that. And it's because the R is not prevalent in their language. The W is. And so they have difficulty pronouncing the R because their mouths aren't used to saying it until they speak English or Russian or something of that nature. Then they get used to using that R. And it always comes out like the closest vowel to it, which is a W. So in this case, you got this bread loaf, which is usually T. You got this D, which usually comes out duh. But in the case of this borrowed word, comes out ta in Cleopatra. But the discrepancy could be easily explained by the principle of homophony, as we just covered, of which Champollion was well aware. For the rest, the two cartouches provided him with a number of other equivalences which could not fail to assist him in his search for further identifications. These the following ones brought in unexpected abundance. Among the cartouches successfully transliterated and identified were those of Alexander, Bernice, Tiberius, Domitian, and Trajan. Besides others containing such imperial titles as Autocrator, Caesar, and Sebastius, the problem was thus solved so far as cartouches of the Greco-Roman period were concerned. But what are those belonging to the older times? Were the hieroglyphs of an earlier age also in part alphabetic, or were they wholly figurative, as Champollion had so often suspected? So right there, you can see the influence of Thomas and Ackerblad on him, because he had so often suspected that those were only pictorials. He had to confirm what he thought by reading Thomas and Ackerblad. So that statement above, once again, we step on it and stuff it in the dirt. Let's keep going. It must be remembered that he was far less well equipped with material for answering this question than many of his English contemporaries. It was on the 14th September 1822 that he received from the architect Huyut copies of bas-reliefs in Egyptian temples, which finally dispelled his doubts. The first cartouche which he noticed was from a rock temple at Abu Simbel between the first and second cataracts. In this cartouche, which is Amen Ramses, it looks like, he at once recognized the twofold as familiar to him from his alphabet. Separated from this by problematical sign was the circle of the sun in Coptic, Ra. The royal name Ramses, see right there. The royal name Ramses or Ramesses flashed across his mind as he read, I don't know what that is. It's yes. That's how he read it. The possibility thus envisaged became a certainty. A few minutes later, when on another sheet he observed the cartouche right here, Jehutimus, with the ibis, Thoth, at its head, and following the ibis the signs which he assumed to read Mes, which would be this and this. This is Jehuti or Tehuberg, so this is why they say Tehut Mes. We say Jehuti Mes. Surely this could be none other than the king Thutmoses, Jehudi Mes, right? Of Manetho's 18th dynasty. Confirmation of the value of the was soon found by him in the Rosetta Stone, where the hieroglyph formed part of the group corresponding to the Greek, which is here. And I don't read Greek well enough. A word which at once suggested the Coptic Missi, Mose, give birth. Where your Bible gets his name from, drawn from Moses, birth from the water, all that extra stuff. Anyway. From that moment onward, each day brought its new harvest. Champollion realized that there was no longer any reason for holding back his discoveries, and on the 29th September, he read at the Academy his memorable Lettre à Dacia relative à l'alphabet des hieroglyphes phonetiques. So he's basically saying there's an alphabet, the hieroglyphs are phonetic. The letters are relative, the alphabet is hieroglyphically phonetic. The hieroglyphs are phonetic, right? In this letter, he characteristically makes no mention of his decipherment of the names Ramses and Thutmoses or Jehudimus. Those discoveries, together with numberless others, were reserved for the marvelous Précis du Système hieroglyph. So he made a precise system of hieroglyphs. His system of how he gets busy and understands and deciphers them and how they move. How you read them. When I say how they move, that's what I mean. How you understand and comprehend them, right? And that's in French. You guys can see. And yeah, I speak a little French, right? Ça passe, comment allez-vous ce soir? All that stuff, right? I speak about 8 languages. Anyway, let's keep going. Which appeared in 1824. Prolonged visits to Turin and to Egypt filled no small part of the remainder of Champollion's short life. On the 4th March 1832, he died at the early age of 41. The successors of Champollion, the collection of new materials, and they're not saying anything in the footnote of importance. And the investigation of these left Champollion no time for setting forth a reasoned account of his conclusions, nor yet for forming pupils. Long before his death, he had acquired a deep instinctive knowledge of the old Egyptian language. He could elicit with ease the meaning of most simple inscriptions and texts on papyri, and the whole perspective of Egyptian history lay clear before him. The posthumous grammar and dictionary appeared between 1836 and 1844, and though edited by Champollion Figat with the devotion of which the elder brother had shown himself so splendidly capable, sadly betrayed the lack of the master's revising hand. An unworthy skepticism as to the value of Champollion's achievements signalizes the years following his death. A new impetus was, however, given to the study of hieroglyphs by Richard Lepsius, Lecture al el Professor H. Rosellini, published at Rome in 1837. Here, the eminent German scholar whose colossal Denkmaler Egyptian and Nubian, which is basically Egyptians and Nubians, later supplemented the great publications of monuments by Champollion and Rosellini, submitted the decipherment to a penetrating and judicious re-examination and pronounced the foundations to be sound. Samuel Birch, whose first publications date from 1838, was an indefatigable translator and editor of hieroglyphic text. His short but admirable Dictionary of Hieroglyphs, printed in the fifth volume of Bunsen's work entitled Egypt's Place in the Universal History, was at length succeeded by Heinrich Ruggish, far larger hieroglyphisch Dematisch Wortenbuch. You always hear us talk about the Wortenbuch, right? Volumes 1 through 4. 1867 and 8. Look up these books. Every time you see one of these books, look up these books, download it. Type in the name and put .pdf and see what pops up for you. Which even at the present time retains a considerable value. Ruggish's philological work embraced all corners of the field, but his principal discoveries were in Demotic, of which he may be considered the real pioneer. Grammaire Demotique, 1855. In hieratic, the greatest advances were made by Goodwin in England and Cabas in France. In the latter country, Emmanuel Desrolles was a brilliant translator of hieroglyphic text and author of an important grammatical work. The late Sir Gaston Maspero, whose published work covered the years 1871 through 1916, had an admirable feeling for the civilization of ancient Egypt, and his vast activities extending over the entire range of the subject make him the outstanding figure among the Egyptologists of 2 generations ago. The present survey deals with philology alone, but it would be wrong to omit all reference to the excavations which have added so greatly to the linguistic student's material. Here the chief's name is that of Mariette, whose excavations began in 1850. From 1884 onwards, the late Sir Flinders Petrie brought new and stricter archaeological methods to bear. Subsequently, the Americans Resner and Winlock improved even upon these. It is, however, only during the last 60 years that our knowledge of the Egyptian language has come to rest upon a really scientific basis. The year 1880 saw the appearance of 2 grammars of the highest importance, the Coptisch Grammatik of Ludwig Stern and the Neuegypt Grammatik of Adolf Erman. We talked about Erman earlier and in another video. The latter, which dealt with the vulgar dialect of the New Kingdom, was supplemented in 1889 by an elaborate study of the language of a papyrus containing stories written in Middle Egyptian. Oh, not too far. Die Sprach des Papyrus Westcar. In 1894 appeared a little manual of Egyptian grammar by Erman, which long formed the indispensable guide for every beginner. English translation of the first edition by J.H. Breasted, 1894, fourth German edition, 1928. And, of course, the study of Coptic was greatly advanced by G. Steindraw's short grammar of the Sahidic dialect, first edition, 1894, second edition, 1904. A yet more important contribution to Egyptian philology was Kurt Seth's extensive and laborious treatise, Das Egypt Verbum, 1899 to 1902. Still a fundamental authority for verb forms and for the general relationship of Egyptian to Coptic. The Zeitschrift für Egyptsprache served as a focus for new light thrown by Erman's pupils on the structure and details of the Egyptian language. But now, after the Second World War, has come to temporary standstill. In close sympathy with, though independent of, the work of the German school and its adherents in other lands, were F.L. Griffith's remarkable success in the paleographical field and his decipherment of the cursive hieratic texts belonging to the Middle Kingdom and of the early Demotic papyri opened up tracks hitherto unexplored. So that's what he's responsible for. Make sure you mark those down, right? In the domain of Demotic, W. Spielberg proved the most prolific and serviceable editor of texts in England. Sir Herbert Thompson collaborated closely with F.L. Griffith in the publication of certain important papyri. Egyptian grammar made a brilliant advance with Battiscombe Gunn's Studies in Egyptian Syntax, Paris 1924. As regards lex, lexic, lexicography, Ehrman and his colleagues inaugurated in 1897 a vast enterprise of which a more extended account is called for. The Wörterbuch der Egyptian Sprache, promoted by the German academies, was to be based upon a collection of all words and all known inscriptions and manuscripts. The collection of the material in the end, amounting to more than 1.5 million slips, was a task in which scholars from many different lands participated. Their part, however, necessarily terminated when the working out of results demanded the concentration of effort exclusively in Berlin. Ehrman, Seth, and H. Grappo now remained sole editors, and when the first name became crippled with old age and failing eyesight, and the second was claimed by other tasks, practically the whole responsibility came to rest on Grappo's shoulders. The last named was fortunate in having the help of the Danish scholar, Dr. now Professor Erikson, to whose admirable handwriting we owe the 5 volumes of the Waterbutch proper. By a less fortunate decision, however, the publication of the all important references to text later expanded to actual citations was deferred until the skeleton of the whole should be complete. Down to 1940, when the last part appeared, these references, Elitstellen, had reached only the end of the letter H, and the publication of the remainder is unpredictable. Lexicography thus constitutes our principal goodness, desideratum, though for the final stage of the language, an immense stride forward was made by W. E. Crumb's great Coptic dictionary, the title page of which bears the date 1939. So, you know what they're talking about making right here, right? This Waterbutch proper and all this stuff. It's the same thing you see me, Smash, Saber Reggie, probably Ujao, probably Sar Mhotep, is probably well, definitely Mario Sperry, definitely Infodici Jacudimus, definitely um um our sister the late great Harry Kafra, our sister, how can I think of your name? That's our big sis. Y'all know she taught everybody the Meta Nature. Um that's what you see us use. Let me see if I got it right here, just so you can understand what they're talking about building here. They're talking about building and making uh let me see. They're telling you about making the TLA. This right here. You see everybody use this. So you can list Egyptian words and you can come in here and you can type this and you can say, oh, see, Kemet means black. And you see us do this all the time. Oh, this is riparian. This is what they're making. This is what you're seeing them make. This is why you see all this in German. Bellwork Descartes von Etribes, Des Patridge Schwarzsteier. And then we click it and we see it don't have nothing to do with Etribes. But and these are his handwritten notes. Whose name is that? Right? Kem. And so this is that's what you're looking. This is what this is. Thesaurus Lingua Egypta. Online now for you. Online now for you, right? In case you don't know why reading this book makes sense. Yeah, that point alone should just bring it home, right? All right, let's go. For further observations on this, because we're almost done on this matter, see A. H. Gardner, Allan H. Gardner, Ancient Egyptian Onomastica, Oxford, 1947, Volume 1, pages uh, 13 through 21. Also, the article in the JEA, Volume 34, pages, right? 1218. You always see me bring one of these, Journal of Egyptian Archaeology, right? These right here, Journal of Egyptian Archaeology, right? Putting this together for you so you understand what's what, how to understand it, how to read it. All these right here. And this section of books, which is old, is so reputable, so reputable, so raw, right? Because in here, yeah, here go one. In here, they not, you got letters going back and forth. You got Allan Gardiner writing to so and so saying, if I stood in front of people and just recited a bunch of glyphs on a wall, they think I'm great too. But if you don't do the work, blah 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 blah, all that's in this type of stuff here. This is one of them right here. This is one of them right here. If I'm not mistaken, yeah, this is it. Volume 30. This is how I found out about Blackman. And then you see me on Smash the Show when I first brought it on his show. But he found out about Blackman through a different source. Saber Reggie found out about Blackman through a different source. But this is how I found out about him. I was in here. Right? So this is why we say dig through these sources. This is why I tell you, write this stuff down. Go write this down and go do some reading. Most of you don't read, you watch. If you only watch and you don't read, what good are you? You're useless. You're useless things. Go read. Then we just we did the first video in this lecture series was the importance of writing and reading. And you can see we're about to stop because there goes letter D right there. Let's finish it out. Until quite recently, another urgent need was a handy selection of passages for study, since K. Seth's widely used Egyptica Leicestok text des Mittleren Reichs in 1924 is no longer available and is likely to have been a war casualty. The place of this work has, however, now been taken by Adrian de Buck's Egyptian Reading Book, Volume 1, late in 1940. Let's see if we can find this. Let's see if they restored this book. I'm going to check that out. In general, Egyptian philology was shown some progress since the first edition of the present work appeared, but not in the same degree or at the same speed as in the generation immediately preceding. In any case, we stand too close to the contributions which would have had to be recorded to make it desirable to bring the sketch further up to date. And that's where we'll stop today. We've knocked out section D. You can see we're going to get into how the text is broken down. There's religious literature, pyramid text stuff. There's coffin text, Book of the Dead. We've got, Ritual of the Divine Code, Funeral, Book of Gates, Caverns, Destruction of Mankind, Litany, Hymn to the Gods. We about to get in. The Stele, the Magic Papyri. How to perform the heck. Secular non-literary documents, medical papyruses, mathematics, lexicographical, legal documents, administration documents, private letters, historical records, literature of the early periods, stories, didactic, which means long, treatises containing wise maxims, all that stuff. Pessimistic literature. I don't think he's right. I think he's weird. All that stuff. We're going to get into all of that, man. Secular poetry. We're going to touch in here, and then all of a sudden we're going to get into this table of contents. We're going to look. And lesson 1 will begin on page 16. First, we'll start with the direction of writing. So stay tuned. Part D is next. We'll cover this in part D as well. This little brief, I think it's pictures or something that's right there. After we do part D, we're going to get into lesson 1. But truthfully, if you've been listening, you've been learning, this is your 4th lesson. And we're just in the beginning portion. Just started the book. Here's page 13. Just getting started. Cold, get retarded. You know what it is. Right here. Brief survey of Egyptian literature. Stay tuned. If you're bloodthirsty, you're reading ahead. You love the game. And with that said, remember who you are. Being a Sir Uncle Jet, Uncle Justin Abdullah, Hennu for listening. We'll see you soon.